I saved up for years to buy my first home. My parents convinced me to put it under their name for legal reasons. A year later, they gave it to my brother as a wedding gift. I didn't fight, just walked away. 6 months later, they were calling, nonstop, because I stepped into the house expecting nothing more than a normal family dinner. My mom had texted me earlier that day asking me to come home after work. "We haven't seen you in a while. Let's have dinner together." It had been a long week, and I almost said no. But something in me, habit, obligation, whatever was left of the version of me that used to prioritize family over myself, made me agree. I should have known something was off the second I walked. Through the door, there were balloons, a banner that read, "Congratulations, Daniel and Sophia." My brother and his fiancée sat at the dining table, practically glowing, their hands intertwined as they laughed with my parents. I froze, gripping the strap of my purse. "What's all this?" My mom turned, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Rachel, perfect timing." I looked between them, waiting for an explanation. My dad stood up, clapping Daniel on the back. "We have big news," Daniel smirked, looking up at me like I should already know what he was about to say. I had a sudden sinking feeling in my stomach. "We're giving them the house," my dad said, beaming, "as a wedding gift." The words hit me like a physical blow. I blinked. "You're... what?" My mom let out a small laugh, like I had misheard them. "Sweetheart, it just makes sense. Daniel and Sophia are starting their lives together, and they'll need a home of their own." I stared at them, my mind scrambling to process what was happening. Daniel's grin widened. "Crazy, right?" Sophia was so surprised. He turned to her, squeezing her hand. "We thought we'd have to rent for a few years, but now we can start our marriage with something stable." Stable? I had spent years saving for that house. I had worked 2 jobs, sacrificed vacations, lived frugally just to afford it, and they were giving it away like it was nothing. I swallowed, my throat tight. "That's my house." My dad sighed, like I was being difficult. "Rachel, you know that's not technically true. It's in our name." For legal reasons, that's what they had told me when I bought it. "It'll protect you from liability, Rachel. It's just paperwork, nothing will change." I had believed them. I had trusted them. Now, here I was, watching them give it away like I had never existed. My fingers dug into the strap of my purse. "I paid for it," I said. My voice quieter this time. Daniel rolled his eyes. "Come on, Rach, don't be selfish." My head snapped toward him. Selfish? He was taking my home, and I was the selfish one? Sophia, sitting beside him, tucked her hair behind her ear and gave me a soft, insincere smile. "You know, Rachel, you're so independent. You'll be fine." That was always the excuse, wasn't it? I was independent. I was strong. I'd figure it out. Meanwhile, Daniel had always been the one who needed more. More support, more help, more of everything I had to work twice as hard for. I looked at my parents. "You really think this is fair?" My mom gave me that same placating smile. "It's what's best for the family." "Not our family. His." I let out a slow breath, pressing my lips together. I could fight. I could yell. But what would be the point? The house was in their name. Legally, they had every right to do this. And clearly, their minds were already made up. So I nodded once, swallowed every word I wanted to say, and walked out. I didn't pack. I didn't even go to my room. I just turned around, stepped back outside, and left it all behind. Let them have it. Let them drown in their own choices. Because one day I knew they would regret this. They just didn't know it yet. I didn't look back. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even let myself think too much, because if I did, I might have turned around and demanded they see how much they had taken from me. But I knew them. They wouldn't care. So instead, I focused on the road, forcing myself to breathe as I made the only decision I could. I had to figure things out on my own. It wasn't like I hadn't done that before. I found a short-term rental that same night, a tiny one-bedroom apartment with barely enough space to turn around, but it was mine. The next day, I used what little savings I had left to pay for the deposit and first month's rent. And just like that, I had a new home. Not the home I had worked for, not the home I had earned, but it was a place to sleep, a place where no one could take away what belonged to me. I threw myself into work after that. I picked up extra shifts, volunteered for new projects. I climbed the corporate ladder faster than I ever had before, determined to make something for myself, something that had nothing to do with them, and it paid off. 3 months later, I got a promotion, a raise that put me in a position I had never been in before, comfortable. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to stretch my paycheck to make ends meet. I wasn't covering anyone else's bills. Every dollar I earned was mine, and I was thriving. Meanwhile, my parents and Daniel had gone silent. They hadn't called, they hadn't texted. Not to check in, not to ask how I was doing. It was as if I had never existed, which should have been fine. I told myself it was fine. But there were little things that kept creeping into my mind. A coworker casually mentioning, "Hey, I saw your mom the other day. She looked a little off." A distant relative messaging me on Facebook asking, "Is everything okay with your family? Your dad seemed really tense last time I saw him." First, I brushed it off. They had gotten exactly what they wanted. They had their perfect plan. A house for Daniel, a future set up exactly the way they wanted it. They were fine. But the first real sign that something wasn't adding up came when I checked social media one night. Daniel and Sophia had been posting nonstop after they got the house. Pictures of their new life, their newly furnished home, posts about how grateful they were, how lucky they were to have such supportive parents. But then suddenly, nothing. Weeks of silence. The last photo was almost a month old, and then I saw it. A new picture of Daniel and Sophia at a restaurant with a caption that made my stomach drop. Crazy how fast things change. There were no details, no explanation, just those words, vague and ominous. I clicked into the comments, scanning for clues. One of Daniel's friends had commented, "Damn man, hope everything works out." Another, "You guys are strong, you'll bounce back." Bounce back from what? I put my phone down, my heart pounding in my ears. Something was wrong, but I wasn't going to be the one to ask. They had cut me out. They had treated me like I was irrelevant. Let them deal with whatever was happening. Then a week later, my mom called. I stared at my phone as it rang, her name flashing across the screen. I didn't answer. An hour later, she called again, and then again. I let them all go to voicemail. The next morning, my dad tried, then Daniel. One by one, they were all trying to reach me. And still, I ignored them. Until finally, I got a text that made me pause. From Daniel. "I know you're pissed, but we need to talk. It's important." I read it twice, my fingers hovering over the screen. Daniel had never been the one to reach out first. He was too proud, too entitled to admit when he needed something, which meant something was seriously wrong. I took a deep breath and typed out my reply. "Why?" A few minutes passed before the response came. "Daniel, just come home, please." I stared at those words. Come home? Like I had a home to go back to? Like they hadn't taken it from me? I didn't reply. But for the first time since I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that their perfect little plan was falling apart. And I had no idea what was waiting for me on the other side. I didn't go to them right away. Even after Daniel's text, after the calls kept piling up, after my mother left me voicemail after voicemail in that soft pleading tone she used when she wanted something, I stayed silent. For 6 months, they had acted like I didn't exist. Now, suddenly, I was the first person they thought of. I didn't believe for a second that it was about making things right. They needed something, and I wasn't going to make it easy for them. But after 3 more days of constant messages, my curiosity got the better of me. I drove back to the house. Not because I missed it, not because I wanted to talk, but because I needed to see what exactly had gone wrong. The second I pulled up to the driveway, I knew it was bad. The lawn, which had always been perfectly maintained, was overgrown and patchy. The curtains inside were drawn shut, making the place look empty, lifeless. And the biggest sign of all, a bright orange foreclosure notice taped to the front door. I didn't even have time to process it before the door swung open and my mother rushed out. "Rachel!" She looked different. Her hair wasn't done, her clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't been sleeping. She grabbed my arm like she thought I was about to run. "Sweetheart, we were just about to call again. Thank God you're here." I pulled away. "What's going on?" She hesitated, but before she could answer, my dad stepped outside too, rubbing his forehead like he had the worst headache of his life. "We need your help," he muttered. Crossed my arms. "With what?" My mom glanced at my dad, then at Daniel, who had just appeared in the doorway behind them, arms crossed, looking annoyed like this was inconvenient for him, like I was the problem. I narrowed my eyes. "Someone explain." My mom sighed, ringing, her hands together. "It's the mortgage, Rachel." I stared at her. "The bank is threatening foreclosure," she said quietly. "We're behind on payments." I let the words sink in, slowly, carefully. Then I let out a hollow laugh. "I never missed a payment," I said. My dad looked away. I turned to Daniel. "How far behind are you?" His jaw tightened. "It's not my fault." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because last time I checked, you were the one living here." He clenched his fists. "We just fell behind a little. The bank is overreacting." I folded my arms. "How far behind, Daniel?" A long silence. Then my mother cleared her throat. 5 months. I felt my stomach drop. 5 months? That wasn't falling behind a little. That was one step away from losing the house completely. I exhaled slowly, piecing everything together. Daniel had gambled away the mortgage payments. I had known about his habit for years. It started small, sports betting here and there, a poker game with friends, but then it got bigger, riskier. I had always assumed our parents covered for him, but now, with a house in his name, he had burned through everything. And now they were scrambling. "You need to help us," my mom said, her voice urgent. I tilted my head. "And why would I do that?" She blinked. "Rachel, this is your home too." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's funny. Because 6 months ago you told me I could find another place." My dad sighed like I was being difficult. "Look, we made a mistake. But the bank is ready to take the house and we just need you." "Just need me," I cut in. Silence. None of them argued as we all knew it was true. I wasn't the favorite. I wasn't the child they had spent their lives making excuses for. But I was the responsible one, the one who always fixed things. And they thought, just like every other time, I'd swoop in and clean up their mess. I glanced back at the foreclosure notice on the door. If I walked away now, the bank would take the house within weeks. But this house was supposed to be mine. And maybe I could make that true again. I looked at Daniel. "How much do you owe?" His shoulders sagged in relief. "We need a little over $18,000. I nodded, thinking. That was a lot. But with my promotion, my savings, and a structured plan, I could cover it. But not for them. Not for free. I crossed my arms. "I'll pay it." My mom gasped, clapping her hands together. "Oh, sweetheart, we knew we could count on you." "But I have conditions," I interrupted. My dad frowned. "Rachel?" I held up a hand. "No, you don't get to argue." They all fell silent. I took a slow breath, making sure my voice was calm and steady. "If I'm paying off your debt, then this house belongs to me." My mother blinked. "What?" "You will formally sell it to me," I said. "For cheap, a fraction of what it's worth." Shock rippled through them. Daniel's face twisted with anger. "You're trying to steal my house." I tilted my head. "Your house? The one you couldn't even pay for?" He opened his mouth, but my dad spoke before he could. "Rachel, that's not fair!" I turned to him. "What's not fair is that I paid for this house and you gave it away like it was a toy." He pressed his lips together, and I knew I had them backed into a corner. They had no other choice. The house was days away from being taken by the bank. They had no money, no options, no backup plan, and I was the only person who could save them. My mom's face paled. "You'd really do this?" I held her gaze. "Yes." A long silence. Then finally, my dad exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "Fine," he muttered. "We'll sign the papers." I nodded, ignoring the way my heart pounded in my chest. I had won, but I wasn't finished. Yet. I had one last move left to make, and once everything was official, they were going to regret ever taking this house from me. I didn't let myself celebrate until every paper was signed. Not until my name was officially on the deed. Not until every legal document had been processed, notarized, and finalized. I didn't trust them. I couldn't. Because for years, I had been the responsible one, the one who always helped, the one who figured things out, and they had used that against me. So I made sure there were no loopholes, no vague promises, no last-minute changes. And finally, 2 weeks later, the house was legally mine again. I sat across from them at the dining table, the same table where they had once told me I had to find another place, the same table where they had handed over everything I had worked for to Daniel, and slid a folded letter across to him. Daniel frowned, picking it up. "What's this?" I leaned back in my chair. "Your 1-month eviction notice." The room went silent. Then Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "You're joking!" I tilted my head. "Do I look like I'm joking?" He skimmed the letter, his smirk fading. "You can't be serious. You said you'd help us." I smiled. "And I did. I paid off your debt. I stopped the bank from taking the house. I bought the house, Daniel." I tapped the table. "Which means you don't live here anymore." My mother gasped, reaching for the letter. "Rachel, sweetheart, we never—" "You never what?" I asked, my voice calm. "Intended for me to have my house back?" He swallowed. "We just assumed that I'd let Daniel and Sophia stay forever, rent-free?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "No, absolutely not." Sophia, who had been quiet this entire time, finally spoke up. Her voice was sharp, panicked. "Rachel, where are we supposed to go?" I raised an eyebrow. "I don't know. Maybe your generous in-laws will take you in?" I turned to my parents. "Since you thought Daniel deserved the house more than me, I'm sure you won't mind opening your doors to him." My dad's face darkened. "Rachel, this is low." I met his gaze. "No, you taking my house was low. This is just correcting a mistake." Daniel slammed the letter on the table. "You can't do this." I stayed seated, calm as I looked up at him. "I can, and I did." My mother's voice wavered. "We're family, Rachel. We don't do this to each other." I stared at her for a long moment. Then I leaned forward, pressing my hands against the table. "Families don't do what you did to me." She flinched. I stood, adjusting my bag over my shoulder. "You have 4 weeks to move out," I said. "I suggest you start packing now." And with that, I walked out. For the next month, they tried everything to change my mind. Daniel and Sophia alternated between begging and threatening me. Sophia called, me crying, saying they had nowhere else to go. Daniel texted me angry messages about how I was ruining his life. My parents pleaded with me, telling me it wasn't fair to punish them all over a misunderstanding. But I didn't answer. Not once. I had already done enough for them. And on the final day of their eviction notice, I drove back to check if they were gone. When I pulled up, the driveway was packed with moving boxes. Daniel and Sophia were arguing by their car, Sophia wiping away angry tears. And my parents? They were helping them load their stuff, because they had no choice now. Daniel and Sophia were moving in with them. I rolled down my window, my voice light. "All packed up?" Daniel turned, face red with rage. You're a real piece of work, you know that? I smiled. And you're a terrible tenant. Guess we're both learning things today. My mother looked at me, eyes pleading. Rachel, please don't do this. I looked at her, expression unreadable. You told me I'd find another place, remember? She inhaled sharply. I put my car in park and got out, walking to the porch that was mine again. You made your choice, I said, crossing my arms. Now you get to live with it. Sophia muttered something under her breath, dragging her last suitcase to the car. Daniel stood there, glaring at me like he wanted to punch a hole in the wall. But there was nothing he could do. They were leaving, and I was staying. I stepped inside my house, finally, my house, and shut the door behind me. No one could take this away from me again.